UPSC's moral stance can be seen in the vigor with which the questions were asked in ethics paper this year 2020. They've asked with vigor and we'll answer them with vigor. We need to understand that this year's paper was a great leap. It was not a linear progression. It was a geometric leap towards this particular goal. Now ethics has become a mainstream paper with this year's paper. It was a mainstream paper, but now you cannot ignore it. Now you cannot afford to not prepare this paper. Even last year's ranker, they believed that this was the toughest paper. But in reality, it was not actually the toughest paper. Yes, a typical one, but definitely the most evolved paper. How? Let's see. As you would remember, I had always maintained that ethics would be related to current affairs and UPSC is going to ask one day or the other ethics in connection with current affairs. This year, there were current affairs based questions and ethics was related to that directly. Then the case studies were very elaborate and very realistic. They are related to the modern times. You cannot do away not understanding about this paper. You need to have the conceptual clarity, which was tested time and again, be it a quotation based question, be it a concept based question, but you need to do that every now and then. Also, the application of those concepts was very important in this year's paper. So let's have a look in the breakup of how the paper was and then we'll move forward. This year, as every year, the paper was divided into two sections, section A and section B. Section A had 13 distinct questions divided in 6 question numbers. Section B had another 6 questions divided from 7 to 12th question. This year there were 2 explicit questions which were based on current affairs, 4 questions were quotation based and 7 questions were based either on the moral thinkers or the conceptual clarity or the application of that conceptual clarity. In section B, the case studies were extremely realistic, quite elaborate, so certain case studies you would need to break down. The application of the concepts was vehemently pervasive in all the case studies. Also, not only your thinking but your impromptu thinking and the depth and breadth of that thinking was tested in this examination. So this was the broad breakup of the paper, and let's pick up with the question number 1. The first question that was asked was, discuss the role of ethics and values in enhancing the following 3 major components of comprehensive national power: CNP, viz, human capital, soft power, culture and policies, and social harmony. It was a 10 marker. Every question was a 10 marker. So section A had 13 questions. So it was essentially a 130 marker and 120 marks for section B. So it's not that you can pay more attention to section A or section B. It is almost equal. In some other years, they might ask section A for 120 marks and section B for 130 marks. So that kind of thing keeps happening. But do remember that there is almost an equivalence of the number which are allotted to both the sections. If you want to break this question down, UPSC is asking about the role of ethics and values in human capital, culture and policies, and social harmony. So we'll see them one by one, but let's understand first about comprehensive national power, a concept which is doing rounds a lot globally these days, and even India has picked up to the tune of it. When we talk about comprehensive national power, especially in India, we cannot exactly call it a new concept. Kautilya, in his treatise Arthashastra, book 6th, did mention about comprehensive national power in a little different words. Let's have a look what Chanakya had to say. The king, the minister, the country, the fort, the treasury, the army, and the friend, and the enemy are all the elements of sovereignty. So with this, what is he meaning? He is meaning that everything which makes the nation or which defines the state are basically the part of comprehensive national power. How can a particular nation be powerful? So when we talk about comprehensive national power, it is a power which accumulates the combined strength of whatever we have. Generally, comprehensive national power can be divided into 2 parts. One is hard power and the other one is the soft power. Hard power connotes the military strength that a country has, whereas soft power denotes the culture, the social policies, people, and things like that. In this particular question, though they have mentioned soft power, culture, and policies, but do not get much confused over there. If we are going by a broad definition of dividing it into hard and soft power, then you might get a little confused. But otherwise, if you realize the way it was in dimensions of ethics, the way it is over here, that there are no strict boundaries to demarcate what comprehensive national power is. China might adopt a different way and different structure. For CNP, US might adopt a different structure and India might adopt a different structure. So broadly, if we say there are two kind of powers which were hard and soft power, and if we see specific over here, it is talking about the soft side of the power, which is human capital, culture and policies, and your social harmony. Human capital is the most rudimentary unit of a nation. For even a nation to qualify as a nation, it needs to have human capital. Technical definition suggests that people are the fundamental formulating unit of a nation, apart from geographic area and other things. Now, this is the route at which the ethics and values do work. It is kind of a guiding light in the dark times. It is kind of a lighthouse when dungeon sales are being done. So ethics and values tells what the right thing is to do. Not only that, it also tells about the right set of values which one need to imbibe. When we are talking about human capital, we are seeing a total sum of it, and the total sum of it can be improved by in two ways. One, imparting the individualistic values and ethics that a person should have, and then the kind of overall values which are there which aligns it more towards the national ideology. Do remember, it's a national ideology, not nationalistic. We are not talking about left or right over here. We are not talking about socialist or capital over here. We are talking about national ideologies. There are things which nation has, like the contemporary social value is that female careerism is valued. So there are greater number of females who are made to study or who like to study, and people do support it. So why is that happening? It's a contemporary trend in the social value. Right. So we are talking about aligning it to the national values when we talk about human capital. So it is impacting. Ultimately, the impact would be on comprehensive national power, because these are the major components of CNP. But at the same time, individualistically, how is it helping these three elements? So human capital would be guided, would be mentored throughout the dark path of evils, and would come out in the brightness of the right and the good. When we talk about culture and policies, the reflection of the ethics and values can be clearly seen in the culture and policies of that particular state or that particular nation. Now, it is the very formative, ethics and values are the very formative unit of the culture and policies. Now, see, when we talk about culture and policies, there are certain things. When we venture down to emotional intelligence, there are certain things that developing countries have as an advantage over the developed countries. And the reason that we had seen is clearly the kind of culture. We as developing nation has more emotional security than what a developed nation would have. That demarcates us, that separates us from the developed nation. So culture, this culture will also impact the kind of policies that we have. When the kind of culture and policies describe a kind of nation it is, these are the sense of right and wrong and the kind of things that you ascribe importance to, which are paving the way, which in essence are ethics and values. The structure and the organization of both culture and policies would be greatly determined by the factors of ethics and values, and this we have seen all over the world till now, and including India, including UPSC, that we are evolving more towards the ethical stance. We are evolving, we are developing, we are progressing on the sense of right and wrong, and where we are consciously seeking the answers towards if a thing is right to do or if a thing is not right to do. So over there also, in culture and policies, soft power, the role of ethics and values is quite imperative and quite inevitable. Now, social harmony calls for tolerance and compassion towards weaker sections and also towards other groups. In today's times, the line between in-group and out-group have been blurred, that we know, that we understand of. So for whatever media presents, yet there would be friends that you have who are Hindus, who are Muslims, who are Sikhs, who are Christians, of different ethnicity, of different religion. You might have some friends from outside India, you might have some friend from US, you might have some friend from Pakistan. So the idea over here is that social harmony is what? It can happen in two ways. One of them is about the weaker sections, and one is about the other group. So other group, when we talk about, we are in essence talking about the out group. Ethics and values makes one sensitive enough. It wakes the person up from the moral slumber that he or she is in, and starts being accommodative towards the knowledge of outgroup also being favorable towards you. So that creates a whole set of social harmony, whole peck of social harmony in order for the comprehensive national power to be strengthened much even more. The three major components miss on certain things, and these are the three things if you have to answer in a very specific format. So the first one is that it throws very bright light on what is the right thing to do. The second thing is that the alignment towards the national ideology happens because of ethics and values. Now again, at the cost of repetition, I am telling it is not nationalist ideology, it is a national ideology, the kind of sentiment that we as a nation have. Also aligning it to the socio-cultural values of the contemporary India or the contemporary nation is done by ethics and values. If you want to see this, you can also conclude it by saying ethics and values empowers the human capital, opens up the cultural stance, resulting in more accommodative and all-encompassing policies marked by moral strength and affirmation. Also, mentors towards more empathetic dealing of disadvantaged sections and outgroups. Greater exposure and resultant value system engrains the specifics of ethics and values and thus emboldens the comprehensive national power with grounds in facts and roots in reality. The next question, which was question number 1, part B, was education is not an injunction. It is an effective and pervasive tool for all-round development of an individual and social transformation. Examine the new education policy 2020, NEP 2020 in the light of above statement. Now this again is a very beautiful question, especially in the wake of the new education policy 2020 which was introduced, and there are multiple points, multiple places where we can understand and see this about. New education policy or the education policy comes at regular intervals, and this policy guides the way the education system is supposed to be in India. Education system till date was criticized for valid reasons, as you know. The tests which were made on the format of achievement test, and often the results in such examination which were based on conventional methods did not yield the result which would result in an overall personality development of an individual. The resultant social transformation thus would also not take place. This undermines the premise on which the education system or the education setup was built upon. New education policy has done away with certain things, or at least in suggestive terms prescribed the things at multiple levels, which takes care of the same. Now when we are talking about new education policy, till now there were conventional methods of dealing with the students, or in the wake of educating them, we were following a 10 plus 2 structure. Now that structure would be replaced by a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure. The replacement of the 10 plus 2 structure with a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure. Now these 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure are the number of years that are in correspondence to the age of a particular kid. Initial 5 refers to the number of years, 5 years, which corresponds to the age 3 years to 8 years of age. So that's how 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 structure is there. Now this makes the whole education bit more flexible. So now initially what was there, that everybody is going to be cast in the same mold. Everybody being cast in the same mold is that everybody would be put only in the 10 plus 2 structure. So no flexibility over there. The resultant personality that will come out to be would be framed by only these 10 plus 2 years. Now there is a greater amount of flexibility. It gives them more freedom to expand the horizon of their understanding, to know and learn more. And this 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 is not the only thing which has been adopted. Along with it there is no strict separation between the science and the art subjects. So earlier, where science and arts you need to choose a 10 after 10th in most schools in India. So you need to go either for maths and biology, or you need to go for some subjects like geography or history or political science, like that. So now when we have moved past that, there will be a choice available in front of you, that okay fine, you like this subject, you can read this subject, you don't like that subject, you don't need to read that subject. Along with it, the vocational training and internships and things like that would also be introduced. So let's say if a person is not very much interested in reading or understanding things, that person can go for vocational training. So tomorrow he or she would develop some skill which will help him or her in the livelihood. The question talks about education being an injunction, and it's not an injunction. But when we talk about injunction, it is something obstructive, that it is letting only one facet of your personality develop, whereas that is not the case. Because what education seeks to achieve, it seeks to achieve an all-round development, right? You would have seen people who are impacted negatively or who are affected in a very negative manner by education. That is why there is a saying in English that half knowledge is worse than no knowledge, because those people are impacted by knowledge or education in a manner which cannot be corrected now. So the education's aim, you see it in the quotation of or quotes of any great thinker, any moral philosopher. They would always suggest that education do not aim to disable you, it aims to enable you. And when we talk about enabling, we are talking about development or growth of an individual into a constructive member of the society. Another thing is that focus upon the mother tongue. Now, mother tongue, why is mother tongue important? Because it is not necessary that you understand English or some particular language. So in order for you to understand or have a grasp over your subject, you need to understand it completely and in entirety. That will happen only when mother tongue is used, because that mother tongue one is very comfortable with, and any concept explained in mother tongue would be easily imbibed, rather than a concept which is told in an alien language. Another thing that has happened with national education policy, or that it seeks to achieve, is the multidisciplinary approach. It is aligning more towards the developed countries, but how is it going to help? Like in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, there are multiple disciplines. In IITs also there would be multiple disciplines. IIT Delhi has started moving towards it. So in words of Mr. Ram Gopal, it could be easily understood that when it is a civil engineer who comes out to be, it is not only important for him to know about the making of a dam, the technical knowledge is fine, but also the socio-environmental impact of that particular dam is important for that civil engineer to know. Only then a more holistic and a more complete person would be made, who is not only good as an engineer, but also would bring in the social transformation that it seeks to achieve. And you can say that National Education Policy has 2020 has recognized that education is not an injunctive tool. It is an all-pervasive and effective tool for all-round personality development of an individual as well as social transformation. So understand, this is a policy and not yet been implemented. It will take some time. But in prescription, these important and good features cannot be denied. The next question is second A. Hatred is destructive of a person's wisdom and conscience that can poison a nation's spirit. Do you agree with this view? Justify your answer. See, now we have seen it several times when a particular emotion, hatred is kind of an emotion which hinders you in not only thinking but also your working. What do emotions do? They set you in a particular energy state. It might be taking away the energy of you, depriving you of the energy, or it might be giving you of energy. Let's say when you are very angry or you are hating someone very much, and you look at someone, your brain would stop working. Why would your brain stop working? Because the energy is being withdrawn from your brain. The light in which you need to think in order to understand something clearly or something more effectively and efficiently, that will not happen since the energy is not present. Now when you are talking about that energy being absent, all your chances, all your opportunities of deciphering if a particular thing is the right thing or the wrong thing would be taken away from you. In that case, the kind of decisions that you would be making would be destructive in nature and never constructive. Now, when you are making a destructive decision, what would that mean? That would, in essence, mean if more number of people are doing the similar kind of thing, when they are garbing their intellect with hatred or other emotions also like anger, jealousy, and other such emotions, then what are they doing? They are losing an opportunity to understand and analyze something in a crucial manner. Now, it might be important for other people, but it is extremely important to realize that for civil servant, they cannot do away with this. And as you are a budding civil servant, you cannot really afford to hate anyone, not even in personal life. Why? Because when you are hating somebody in personal life, you are bringing that kind of tendency to everywhere else. When you are hating someone, it comes as a part of your nature, and there is a great chance that your decision or your choice or your way of analysis will not be impartial. It would not it would be suffering. It would be a very partial analysis that can happen. And civil servants, bureaucrats, budding bureaucrats, civil services aspirants, what do they need to do? They need to keep their head straight around the fact that they have to analyze the best energy state or the best state for anybody to have in a particular period of time in order to analyze the things most clearly and most effectively is a neutral mindset. If you are very happy, if you are in a very positive mindset, then you will start thinking of a lot of things which are broadening your horizons of understanding, horizons of your creativity and other things, but definitely not impacting your analytical skills in a positive manner. Again, when you are going for negative emotions, or you one has hatred, anger and things like that, in that case also the same thing is happening. Now it is more on the negative side. If you want to know technically, there is something called as cognitive narrowing that happens. That means you are not able to think, you are not able to understand what is going to happen, or you're not able to understand the right impact or the consequence of a particular thing. In that case, you start taking wrong decisions, you start making wrong choices, and as you know, decisions and choices have consequences. So if you have made a wrong choice, there will be wrong consequence to it. If you understand, with civil servants, you need to understand that there is a quality decision that is to be made, and if you're not making a quality decision, if you're not making a judgment which is qualitative, again the whole idea of taking a neutral and an effective decision goes away. So when we talk about hatred being destructive of person's wisdom and conscience, it does impact the intellect that a person has, that the intellect with which a person can judge a particular thing to be right and wrong, and everything is basically garbed behind the idea of hatred. If adopted by more number of people, by a greater number of people or the citizens, it goes against the national spirit, simply by them not being able to understand a thing for what it is, but by putting in their own perception, their own shade before understanding that. Case in point, a particular community is bad just because of what their food habits are. So that again is hatred, where people go for mob lynching, where people go for other things, which is not justified, at least on moral grounds. It is not justified on ethical grounds. Why? Because then, this example you can also quote in the examination, because then the valid or the true, the genuinity of the decision is taken away. It cannot be called to be a genuine decision. It cannot be called to be a valid choice by ethical standards, because in this you have placed a non-human living being at a higher pedestal than a human being. So that is very important for us to realize, that it can go downhill any day when hatred, anger, jealousy or any other such negative emotions are there. So definitely, when this statement is quite agreeable, wisdom and conscience both are impacted, not only greatly, hugely, but also very gravely. Next question is second B. What are the main components of emotional intelligence? Can they be learned? Discuss. So when we talk about emotional intelligence and the main components that it has, as we know that emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor your own self, the other person, and the emotions that are there, the emotional transaction that is happening, and then using that understanding to guide your own thought and behavior. Now understand, when we are talking about emotional intelligence, the main components would be awareness about yourself, your cognition about your own self, the management, self-management, self-regulation, relationship management, making yourself more aware and self-critical, empathy, motivation, compassion. All these are the main components of emotional intelligence. Why these are the main components of emotional intelligence? Because without this, it is extremely difficult for one to be aware about self. So all these things basically help one in being aware about self. So when one is not being aware about self, there is no point in talking about emotional intelligence. The first thing, the change in emotional intelligence, or the change that emotional intelligence would seek to achieve, would start always from self. It will never happen from the other person. Yes, it is important to understand the other person as well, but as we saw in the last question when we spoke about hatred, it is extremely difficult for me to be hateful towards someone and then understand what the other person is saying. So I have to completely remove the hate from myself in order to understand the other person. In case if you have to understand someone, you have to remove the hate. So whenever you are talking about civil services aspirants, or whenever you are talking about people going to on the path of emotional intelligence, increasing their intelligence of emotions, it will always start with self. And when we spoke about relationship management, management of self-awareness and self-management, regulation, all these things are becoming the major components of emotional intelligence, for the same reason that they are making one person so aware that the regulation and the further thing that follows are not very difficult to achieve. When we are talking on that level, another question that comes out to be, and it is a natural question that is logically connected to the preceding one, which is that is it possible to learn? Now you would know that there are a lot of courses that also happen, and people do learn it from themselves as well. So definitely it is possible. There is a natural knack that I would say that people have, because genetics do play an important role, but nevertheless it is not impossible to learn these things. Essentially, when you are being a civil servant, when you go to the training in Lavasna, what has been taught to you? Not only the intellectual things, not only the technical deals, not only the things that you need to carry yourself with. You are also told about emotional intelligence. Your maturity has been increased to a particular level. Why? In order for you to understand things, in order to be more aware about yourself. So when we are talking about that, what does that mean? That means in essence that these things can be learned. If you're not self-aware, let's say there is a person X who is not aware about himself or herself today. Now that person needs to know and understand about herself or himself more. The more the understanding and the fluctuations in the emotions, the more that wave is understood about their own emotions, the better the chances of the person regulating it, the better the chances of doing it. So learning definitely is possible, and it can be learned as motivated you are, as zealous you are. So far you can learn the emotional intelligence. So definitely this is something which can be dealt with. The next question is, what teachings of Buddha are the most relevant today and why? Discuss. Now see, there can be noble truths about Buddha that you can talk about. There can be universal truth about Buddha that you can talk about. The best thing that you can do over here is what teachings of Buddha are most relevant today. So the question is not only what are the most relevant ones. The question is what are the most relevant today. So you can always take the Eightfold Path, where he explains something. This thing he gave this sermon in the Deer Park. He suggested that there is a wheel, and the wheel at the pivot there is something called as nirvana, the pivot. That means the central thing of that wheel, and it is connected with eight spokes. And these eight spokes basically tells you about certain right things, eight right things. So what are they? Let's have a look. It is about the right view that a person should have, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So all these things in the right manner, when you have, there is a great chance that you deal with the administration and people around you in a very effective and efficient manner. Now understand, whenever UPSC is asking a particular question, they are talking in terms of administration at a great level. You need to understand that teachings of Buddha are plenty, and you cannot really sum them up in a 10 marker. But at the same time, you can definitely tell what are the most relevant ones today. And when it is structured in a fashion of Eightfold Path given by Buddha, it becomes much more easier for one to realize these are the things which are most important. Why would these be most important? Because when you are having right thought, right livelihood, right view, right concentration, right everything, right effort, then there is seldom the time that when you might go wrong. It is something akin to Aristotle's virtues. You know the right thing about everything. So in a particular situation and at a particular time, you would know what is the right thing to do. So those things can be picked up today, because now erosion of values is one of the most cited thing that is happening in contemporary society. In case if one is able to follow the Eightfold Path, it becomes quite easy for one to deal with the life. Easier said than done. It is easy to write in an answer but difficult to follow in real life. But yes, if you do follow, it will be life changing. And not only his, even Aristotle's and other people. But that's not the point over here. Let's move on to the next question. We are going a little fast because there is a lot to cover and we are running on a tight schedule. So we have to go a little fast. But in case if you have any doubts, you can post it in the comment section and we will be able to answer you. So let's pick the next one up. The will, third B, the will to power exists, but it can be tamed and be guided by rationality and principles of moral duty. Examine this statement in context of international relations. So see, now again, when we talk about the will to power and we talk about rationality and moral duty, it becomes the whole scenario becomes quite easy. So when we talk about international relations, we can think about the war that US raged on Iraq and took Saddam Hussein as hostage. That is something where will to power can be seen very clearly. When China exceeds its territories and moves into some other place, or when the Palestinian issue is coming up, or when other such issues are coming up in all throughout the world, what are we talking about? In essence, we are talking about the will to power. Yes, it would exist, and definitely at a point of time, even India was like that when it would want to expand its territory to. I'm talking before independence, and I'm talking about from ancient to medieval times. That there were times times when Indian rulers would want to occupy as big as territory as possible. So that's why we can see the expense of territory from right from Afghanistan. It was an Indian subcontinent for that reason. So in all these times we can see the will to power did exist, but if one is rational and if one is having the sense of moral duty, then these things would be, they could be aligned in a much better manner. Why? Because the rationality, we are not talking about rationalization, we are talking about rationality. What does rationality help you in? Which ethics is a very strong, or probably the strongest advocate of rationality is ethics, because it is reasoning, as you can also see in Immanuel Kant's categorical imperatives, that it is the reasoning what takes you to the right sense of something. So when you are rational, you would realize that what you are doing is wrong. So will to power is fine, but killing innocent, not fine. Exceeding into somebody else's territory for the sake of oil, not fine. So how are you able to understand? Because you are being rational. In case if you are not rational, in case if you are rationalizing, in case if you do not have a balanced sense of justice, and when we talk about justice, what does justice have in essence? It is talking about moral duties, as Socrates also suggested that justice has intrinsic value. So even when we are talking about that intrinsic value, even when we are talking about international affairs, when we are talking about moral duty in that context, then essentially we are talking about some sense of balance, some sense of sanity in any nation, in any state, while we are delivering towards the notions or towards the concepts of international relation. So when we are talking about the will to power, definitely we can talk about it as it's not an intent, as a temptation that different states might have, not at an individual level, at a national level, at a state level, but they can be tamed by what? Rationality and moral duty. So if you have a sense of justice, if you realize that this is not the right thing to do, you will be able to realize that only and only when you are rational enough. If you are not rational, if you are rationalizing, then you will give justification for the wrongdoings. You will always keep giving justification for the wrongdoing, and I am talking at a national level. And when you are giving justification for the wrongdoing, you will always suggest that we waged war on Iraq for some other reasons where the real reasons would be hidden. So rationality, with rationality you can easily tame that. So say case in point, a very good example is India. We are not trying to extend ourselves into others' territory. We are trying to defend ourselves, but we are nevertheless not venturing into others' territory because we respect it. We admire the concept of sovereignty. We really have reverence towards people's freedom, towards individuals' freedom. That is happening. Why? Because people were rational enough, and that you could see beautifully in words of either Jawaharlal Nehru or his contemporary. In fact, in Mahatma Gandhi, there is very good saying by a quotation by Mahatma Gandhi where he talks about the importance of love in international relationships. So when you're talking at that level, that is the level at which our foundational fathers were. So definitely India can be a very good example while we talk about that will to power maybe existent, but again it can be tamed and guided by rationality as well as the principles of moral duty. With that, we'll move on to the next one, which is the fourth A. Distinguish between laws and rules, discuss the role of ethics in formulating them. So definitely laws and rules, now this is one of the simpler questions that came this year. Laws are something which are made by a legislative body, rules can be made also by a company. Laws would be applicable in a particular nation, whereas rules would be applicable beyond that nation as well. So let's say if there is a particular law which is applicable in India, it might not be applicable in the United States, but if you are working in any company, let's say Infosys or TCS, if you go to the on-site job and you're working in US, maybe the same rules apply to you. Alright, so it would be in line with the law which are there, and more so law provide you the skeleton, rules are more like the filler. So rules basically provide clarification for what a particular law would be, filling the muscle and mass on the laws. It is important for us to know the difference, but that difference is quite simple and it's not that technical. The role of ethics in formulating them, yes, as we saw that laws and rules, or even the constitution for that matter, is not dependent on, not contingent upon thin air. It's not a castle built on thin air. It is something which is being built upon the ever evolving idea of what is the right thing to do. So I'll give you a very simple example for that matter. In case if you know that killing an innocent is wrong and it is also illegal, how did it happen? When on an evolutionary path we were moving, it was not that God dropped a holy text on us and it all happened suddenly, because even the gods and other things would have a sequential manner, in the chronology that the world existed, that the globe existed, and the people on this globe existed. But there would be a sense of wrong attached to murdering someone. So initially, when that sense developed and it was realized that killing an innocent is not the right thing to do, that thing was adopted. It is kind of a universal law all throughout the world. So it would be imbibed then in the law. So ethics basically paves the way, it sets the boundaries for what a law could be, and rules as an explanatory thing or as an explanation to the laws or the fillers for the law again would be based upon the sense of right. You cannot really base a rule upon the thing which is not right. Case in point, the example that we can take today is of section 377 of Indian Penal Code, which due to which the homosexuality, LGBT community, homosexuality was criminalized. Now when Supreme Court struck down section 377, that means that these people would not be criminalized. Now that is again in line with the contemporary values that we have. And another good example of minority impacting the majority. How did this happen? That ethics helped in formulating it. So ethics realized that ethics is a science of right and wrong. So it realized that it is not right to discriminate with the homosexuals or discriminate homosexuals. Section 377 of IPC was criminalizing that, was calling homosexuality to be unnatural. So when later the idea evolved, ethical idea evolved on the lines of that this is okay to be homosexual, then Supreme Court struck it down, and now laws can be made upon that. So the good example that you can pick up over there when we talk about role of ethics in formulating the laws and rules. Moving on to the next one, fourth B. A positive attitude is considered to be an essential characteristic of a civil servant who is often required to function under extreme stress. What contributes to a positive attitude in a person? Now, one thing it is, as you would have seen, we had spoken about disconnected questions. This is one of the disconnected questions where there is a statement given and followed by a question which is not talking about it in the light of the above statement. Definitely, positive attitude is an essential characteristic of civil servant. Why? Because he needs to work under extreme stress. Now, you see, there might be a fight that you have had with your wife or with your husband or with your parents or with your family, or your child might not be listening to you, might be in adolescent age, it might be very rebellious towards you, and you have to go to the office, and then you suddenly realize that there is some mob violence which might come up as an issue today, and that thing was steaming up for a huge number of days, and on the top of that, it is COVID lockdown that you have to put in place. So all in all, it is a very stressful situation to be in. Now this stress is a very little stress because we are giving it as an example. Real time stress is much more higher than this. You would know, even in real life, even in your personal life, you would find yourself at times where the stress is so high that you are not able to take a judgment, make a call. Whereas civil servant would need to make a call that quick. The civil servant would need to decide or make a judgment in a very quick manner. That would happen only and only when a person is having a positive attitude towards life. A negative attitude towards life or towards the services would kill you. Now this is one of the questions that was well accepted for a very long time, because what is the very basic need of knowing the attitude? Because if your attitude is positive, if you are thinking in a hopeful light towards the kind of situation that are presented around you, it is easy for you to say. See, we say that sometimes hope is the only thing that a person has. When we talk about positive attitude, it is a precursor to that you might not be in a very docile environment, you might not be in an environment which is assistive to your growth or something. But again, in terms of Viktor Frankl also, that everything around a particular person, that is the environment of a person, can change. Every other thing can change and alter and control every other thing, but the attitude cannot be controlled by that person. So that's the Holocaust story that we had. But if positive attitude is there, the person would sail out. Another example that can be given is of Nelson Mandela. Now he was in prison for so many that is the lifetime, right? But nevertheless, when Nelson Mandela would be known today, why? Because a positive attitude in that, they're confined by something, yet doing that. So when we talk about civil servants, they work under extreme stress. You do not realize it today, but once you become a civil servant, or ask the people who have already scored the ranks, that time you would realize the kind of stress a civil servant is in, especially the services that directly deal with law and order, like IAS and IPS. Over there, the amount of stress is very high, where political interference is also high, dealing with the citizen is also very high, your personal life doesn't go away, and you have to deal with everything all at once, including, now comes the real test, by the real situation that are presented to you. So positive attitude would be needed to sail through such hard situation and hard times, and what would contribute to positive attitude in a person? The very first thing would be that you need to be very optimistic towards life. You have to be very objective and fair towards what you see. You have to see a fact as fact. You don't have to base your understanding upon evidences. Also, you should have a problem solving ability, not only the ability but a knack for it. If you do not have a knack for it, you need to develop it, otherwise there is no going out, no saving from this. Then you need to have a fine balance between your emotional, cognitive and action tendency component, your behavioral component. If there is not a fine balance, you would always be struck up and stretched. Sometimes your emotions pulling you towards them, and sometimes your brain pulling you towards a completely different direction. In that case, you cannot be called to be having a positive attitude. So homeostasis is important when we talk about emotional, cognitive and behavioral component. But at the same time, you need to work very consciously towards it. As well as when we talk about positive attitude, you need to be emotionally intelligent in order to bring that. So this will work as a holistic approach in order to bring out a positive attitude in a civil servant who is working under extreme stress. With that, we'll move on to the next one. The next question is, what are the main factors responsible for gender inequality in India? Discuss the contribution of Savitri Bai Phule in this regard. The phenomenal person, because she was born in 1831, and a person at that time, if able to do such thing, because that time women education, they were not even supposed to enjoy the very basic things that were available to males. So she did a great deal in education, a great deal for women education. If you have heard about Bhidewada, the first school for girls education, you would know about her effort. Anyway, let's talk about the main reasons responsible for gender inequality. The patriarchal mindset that is there, the education system that is there, the kind of myths and stereotypes that are be done, the policies, the way they are implemented, it's not as effective. The gender sensitive processes are not institutionalized, and another important one is lack of community ownership in the mishappenings that happens towards females or towards the gender bias. So that is not existing. So these factors are there. Now Savitri Bai Phule, in 1831 she was born, and if I'm not wrong, in 1848 I believe she set up the school for women education, and her husband also supported her greatly in that. So they are known for that. And with the idea was to bring, Savitri Bai Phule's idea was to bring about a change via educating women. She believed education to be the central plan through which women could be empowered and hope to stand with the equal footing with the rest of the society. She was engaged in a very passionate struggle to bring equality between women and men. So done great work, especially in education. She has done great work. And also see, there are a couple of questions based upon education. We can see female career. This year's paper is very evolved paper. It talks about ethical concepts. Again, it talks about current affairs education. It is spoken about twice. It is spoken about female careerism. Wonderful paper. We'll move on to the next question, which is, the current internet expansion has instilled a different set of cultural values which are often in conflict with the traditional values. So when we talk about the current internet expansion and the different set of cultural values which are being instilled, see, you would have seen bragging has become an important part of the current generation. At times people are devaluing themselves and others. At times they are emotionally stable. So all these things are coming in the wake of internet expansion that has taken place. But it is not only that these are the things which are existing now. People are more, these are not the only things, because these are only the negative things. There are positive aspects also, like learning at disposal, then constructive competitive spirit, which has bred after the internet expansion in a much expansive manner than what it was earlier. Now, how do you need to deal with them? Because such kind of things which are not in line with traditional values. Earlier, you would see the people, you can see your probably father, mother, or probably your grandfather. They were very stable. They were very content. They were very unfidgety. So fidgeting is something which is happening today a lot of days. Another thing which happens. How can you do that? By making them train in the rational and content of what emotionally intelligent person would need to do. By expanding the horizon of their cognitions, by expanding the way they understand things, by giving them tasks which are more social oriented rather than internet oriented. Also, the on-screen time has to be reduced to a great degree, because the more a person interacts socially, the more stable the person would be. That all said, it is very important for one to realize that the time when internet is expanding, the time when technological advancement are happening, it is not something an ill or an evil in itself or in themselves, whatever they are, even capital for that matter. It is a kind of uses that we have. So when a kid is a kid, that's the time when we need to train them with the etiquettes of what internet or technical kind of technical exposure they should have in order to be built up in a more social human being. Because as you know, at the base and at the root level, everybody is a social animal. Human beings are social animals. So until unless that tendency or that basic thing is not being catered into, there is no chance that people can come out with it. But when we talk about internet expansion and different set of cultural values, the values that you can discuss about, those are the ones. And also and remember that it is not only the negative side that it has, it also have the positive ones, as we discussed. Moving on to the next one, what do each of the following quotation mean to you? Sixth one, the first one: condemn none. If you can stretch out a helping hand, do so. If not, fold your hands, bless your brothers, and let them go their own way. Swami Vivekananda. It's quite a clear quotation where you can apply it in real life, you can apply it in administrative life also, but not to a very great degree. Reason being that over there you are supposed to be voluntarily acting on something wrong if you see happening. So over here, yes, definitely, if you're condemning someone, again, it's talking about the channelization of your energy. So if you are channelizing your energy towards condemning someone, towards telling that how wrong a person is, you are not using it constructively. It is a destructive use of your energies. It is about either you help someone or you move ahead, you let them go their own way. So you can understand this with a simple example of somebody going over the road, and let's say that person is very drunk and riding a bicycle, and that person falls down. You don't get down to help that person. But if you're not helping that person, don't start condemning that this person is very drunk. Let him go his own way. If you can help. Otherwise, you go your own way. Let him go to his own way. Though when you are in administration, you need to take care of that. So that is why I said that this, and that is why I gave you this simple example, because with this you can easily differentiate that how far it can be applicable in administration and how far it can be applicable in real life. Next question is the sixth B. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, by Mahatma Gandhi. This is another question that we have been telling you to prepare well. Why? Because Mahatma Gandhi has placed intrinsic value in service, and that's how it becomes important. And for last many years, I have been telling you that quotation on service by Mahatma Gandhi would come in the examination one way or the other. So it has come in a very explicit manner this year. Definitely this is right, because at times we try to find out ourselves by having no external barometer, no external thing to tell us that what is right, what is wrong. How do we need to find out what hides in ourselves? So once we give ourselves truly to it, is kind of reflective of the moral attitude that Mahatma Gandhi had towards service. That when you give in yourself completely, when you lose yourself completely towards the ends of others or towards the service of others, that's the time when you start realizing, fine, these are my limits, this is what I am supposed to do, this is what I am not supposed to do, this is how I understand. So if you want to know more about yourself, if you want to find about yourself, you cannot do it according to Gandhi by any other way apart from giving into for somebody's service. And this is what in contemporary times a lot of people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and a lot of people do agree to that. And it is very important to realize that it is the service, serving others, or it is a service to others, which actually paves the way. It makes the matters very clear for you, crystal clear for you. So an important one by Mahatma Gandhi, which was to be seen, and which finally, unfortunately, came this year. The next question is: a system of morality which is based on relative emotional values is a mere illusion, a thoroughly vulgar conception which has nothing sound in it and nothing true. Socrates. A very strong and powerful message by Socrates. As you know, his teachings live beyond centuries, beyond ages, and his words are never arguable. So definitely, yes, a morality which you are basing on a relative emotional state or relative emotional values, they are nothing more than illusion. Why is he saying so? Because our emotions, see, how do we work? As we had seen in attitude as well, that you have cognition, brain power, you have emotions, emotional power. So they work in tandem with each other. Now let's say if you are getting very emotional, or a person who is very emotional, the rationality would not exist in the judgments that that person is making. And when the rationality is not there, the moral values that come out to be would be very subjective in nature. They would be guarded by the evidences, there would be confirmation bias in them, there would be a lot of adulteration in that would happen. Why? Because then if you are feeling good, you will call something to be good. If you are not feeling good, you will call something to be bad, whereas it might not be true. Take the very simple example of kids at home. Sometimes they would want to not wear a sweater when it's winter, but you force them to wear. Why? Because you know that it's for their good. So when they do not have an idea, they are just emotional about the fact that they do not want to wear a sweater, they do not like wearing a sweater. Even then when you push them to wear a sweater, they might not like it, but that's the right thing to do. Now this thing is a very simple example which is in prudential domain. Nevertheless, ethics is also similar. Let's say you have grown up and you are not attending to the needs of somebody in your family, and they are being deprived, they are hurt, they are jeopardized because of what you are doing. It is kind of a destruction, yet you do not attend to that just because you are not in the right emotional state. It is not the right thing to do. So Socrates suggests that if you are basing morality on something as subjective as emotion, then morality cannot be developed. What he also implicitly means is that you have to be reasonable, you have to be very, very rational and logical. You have to apply objective reasoning, not subjective reasoning, while coming out to the concepts of morality. He opposes such kind of morality so vehemently that it calls it a thoroughly vulgar conception, and he calls it nothing sound and nothing true in it, and which is actually true. See, today the kind of policies which are made, or today the kind of hatred which is being spread at times by people claiming to be either nationalist or people supporting the national cause, but it is hatred against different communities. So over there, the concept of morality is not a realistic notion on objective standards. It is a subjective notion of morality on very weak basis. Case in point, beef eating. So if there is a community, if Muslims eat beef, so it's not a problem, that it's not an issue that one should go and kill them. It should not be about killing them. If there's agreement between what people should eat or not, probably the best way is to come out on a logical debate. But when people get emotional and start basing their morality on such emotional basis, what would happen? There would be a mob who would go and kill a person. So undermining the human value, which by historical facts we know, by philosophical historical facts and by moral philosophical historical facts, we know that human life is much more valuable than anything else. So this you need to remember. And another important one and a very interesting quote which has been given by Socrates. So that's how you can handle it. Now we'll move on to the next section, which is case study. Again, we are going to go a little fast, so be careful, and just in case if you have any doubts, put it in comment section. Let's read. The first one is a little elaborate. Let's have a look. What does it say? It's better that you get the paper in front of you, either in your mobile or on your laptop, or probably take a printout of that, or if you have written the examination, hold the paper in your hand, because I'll be reading a little fast, so you have to catch up with that.